What is up, Facebook land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and before I introduce my very special guest, Charles Mickschl, I'm going to dedicate the show. This one's going to be a kind of tough one for me because it hits home. Everybody that follows the show and knows me knows that I lost my brother 30 years ago, my only sibling. And unfortunately, 4 years ago today, my wife lost her only sibling, her sister Tracy, to cancer. Cancer was pretty much a part of her life for 22 years. She was stage 4 for the majority of those 22 years. And when she died, she was the longest surviving stage 4 cancer patient at University of Pennsylvania Hospital. There's 2 sons, Jack and Nathan. Nathan's leaving for college in about a month, San Diego State. Jack is going to be 15, and they missed her mom. And I know my kids miss their aunt, and my wife certainly misses her sister. And so today's episode is dedicated to Tracy Suckley and her memory. And if anybody wants to say a couple prayers tonight for my wife and her family, I would appreciate that. My book. I've made a point now to promote my very old book. Wrote it in 2006. I published it in 2006. A Brother's Love, a Memoir. Second edition of that book, the next part of that book, is being written as we speak. It's called The Accidental Speaker, which is basically the second half of my journey thus far. And I'm very proud of that book. It's my dedication to my brother. It's a history book for my wife and kids to know somebody they never had a chance to meet. And it's a chance for people to become friends with my brother when he really didn't have that many growing up. So it's important for me to share that. So if anybody wants to get it, you can go on my website, mattcubbler.com. You can go to Amazon. You can go anywhere to find that book. All right, my man Charlie. Charlie is a unique guy. He's got an amazing story. I can't wait to share it with you guys. Tragedy doesn't have a name. It just strikes, and it doesn't really care what your situation is. And unfortunately, it hit Charlie in a way that I can't even imagine. I have a 21 and 16-year-old, and I can't imagine what it would be like to lose one of them. And Charlie's son committed suicide after being bullied, and Charlie's taken that tragedy and turned it into something positive in his son's honor, and in order to help other people so they don't have to go through the same heartache and sadness and pain that he went through. So without further ado, my man Charlie Mickschl, how are you, buddy?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
I'm excited, man. I think I do a lot of shows. You're my 48th episode, and some of them are athletes and they're telling stories about their athletic exploits, and some are business people, some are just inspirational, motivational people. But sometimes I had a friend of mine, maybe 5 episodes ago, Dawn Sweeter. I worked with her husband, Jim, when I was in the Air Marshals, and they lost their daughter to the opioid epidemic. And that was just a brutally difficult show for her, and just hard to fathom the anguish she went through and her husband Jim went through. And I can imagine that this is going to be one of those kinds of shows where we're just, trying to reflect on your son's life and what he meant, and then the reasons why you're doing the things you're doing today. Mm-hmm. So you've seen the show. I asked one question, and that one question is the same for everybody. So who is Charlie Mickschl?
I guess by answering that, I grew up with 8 kids in our family. Back then, I guess that would be a Catholic family. They typically don't have 8 kids anymore. So my dad worked. He owned his own business. Kind of grew up. Went to locally here in Milwaukee Marquette High School. Went to college for criminal justice. Thought I always wanted to be a cop. I always had this need to serve and help people. Like that was something that I always wanted to do. And I jumped around from job to job. I just never satisfied, never could figure out like what my calling was meant to do. And so like the whole what I do now was kind of sparked back in 2010. One night, our son Kristopher came up and he's like, I'm just having trouble sleeping. We've noticed a pattern that he was having trouble sleeping for a while. So we brought him to the pediatrician. The pediatrician tested him for like everything, even leukemia. Couldn't find anything. And he goes, we believe that your son's, mildly depressed. So they put him on some Zoloft. And like we questioned him, like, well, why are you depressed? What are you feeling? He goes, well, I don't feel depressed. And like something was there, but he didn't want to share it with anyone. Like he never shared anything, what was going on. The school knew nothing that was going on. And then throughout the school year, we started noticing that even in the wintertime, like all the time he wore this sweatshirt. And it was always long sleeve. I've never seen him take it up. And we kind of questioned him and said, well, why are you wearing that all the time? Like, let me see. And he like pulled his arm away. He didn't want to show us. So we pulled his sleeve up. I had to force it up. And there were cut marks on both of his arms, up and down his arms. And so we're like, we got him in to see a psychologist. And the psychologist confirmed that he was depressed. They increased his medication. So about 2 weeks later, we went out. We came back from a funeral. He stayed there with his two sisters, and we went out to go get some pizza. My wife at the time and I went out to get some pizza. And all of a sudden, like I'm coming out of the pizza place, and she's waving me over here. And I get in the car. I throw the pizza in the back. She goes, Michaela just called. And Kristopher's not. She said Kristopher's not responding to me. She's not moving. I think he's playing a joke. And my heart just sunk. Like I knew with everything that was going on, it just sunk. Like I said, hang up the phone, call 911. And I hate saying this, but I said, I tell them that you think your son just committed suicide. Like I knew something. So I'm racing home. I'm going through every stop sign, every red light. And I remember pulling into the driveway, and I could smell that burningness from the brakes. Like you're going fast and you smell that brakes. And the garage door comes up, and we race into the house and down to the basement and around the corner. And my son had hung himself. And like, just the emotions that overcame, like I just went into reaction mode. Like obviously, like you being a police officer, we just react and we just move. And so I went into that. We got him cut down. We started CPR. He was brought out to a local hospital. They had to fight for life him to a local children's hospital. And he was on life support for about 3 days. And finally I walked into the doctor and I'm like, I want to see what's going on. What is going on? And they showed like the scan of his brain. It just swelled up. And there was nothing that we could do to save his life. We ended up donating his organs, where he saved about 8 other people's lives. And it was just like this moment of like shock. And I'm like, I couldn't cry. I was in so much shock. I just like, this didn't seem real. And it didn't seem like for a while after, like he wrote a letter. He wrote a suicide letter. And when I read that, I like, well, why is he talking about this girl, And so I'm just putting these pieces together. I'm finding out. I started investigating. I figured it out, and I found out later that that basically he was being bullied. He liked this really popular girl in his class. She didn't like him back, so her and 2 other girls would make fun of him, call him names, put stuff on social media, and I was just lost for a long time. Like I just didn't know what to do, and finally, it was like, I don't know if it was a higher power or if it was Kristopher speaking to me, but eventually I just had this strong pull. Like I've never felt anything like this before, just pulling me like, you've got to do something. And so I looked into anti-bullying organizations and different organizations. And I'm just like trying to figure out what's the best route. And I'm like, and the thing that transformed my life is I went to a Tony Robbins event. And when I came back from that, I'm like, this is it. This is what I have to do. I've got to help these kids by figuring out what is their specific problem and just get that out of them. Because, I mean, as parents, we dump all this emotional baggage on our kids, and our kids have the emotional baggage from going to school, and we put so much emphasis on what somebody says. And we take that to heart. And there's so many things that I can talk about and help to overcome that and just make it more real. And so a week after Kristopher passed away, we had to put our dog down. He was riddled with cancer. We had to put him down. 6 months later, my brother-in-law had a massive heart attack and died on his desk. A year after Kristopher passed away, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer, passed away 4 months after that. And a month after my dad passed away, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died a month after that. So like everything now that I look for in life are signs. I need to learn from what's going on and then grow myself and how I can make a greater impact and serve other people. And that's kind of where my journey is now beginning, is serving others.
Wow, man. First of all, thank you for sharing that. I know firsthand what it's like to have to go back and think about the moments when those kinds of things happen and what you were feeling, and the vivid smell of the brakes. And I can remember my mom's crying on the phone when she was calling to tell me that my brother had died, but I was too unaware. I knew he was in an accident, but I thought I kept saying, I know, because I thought she was saying she was crying because he was in the accident, but she was actually trying to tell me that he had passed. And I can just hear the words on the phone. So I know what that must feel like. I want to do a deep dive here because I think it's important. Let's talk about Kristopher. Let's talk about what he was going through. Let's try to be as clear and specific as we can so that people who may have kids that are being bullied, that they could actually figure out some signs and symptoms as to what's going on. Obviously now after the fact on your end, but if you can go back and think about the warning signs that maybe you didn't pick up on at the time, that maybe we can utilize today to help somebody.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that after he passed away, we looked up every single warning sign, like what there is. And we're trying to say, did he have this? Did he have this? And like at a moment, he was just kind of like at a flat pace in his life where he's just not a lot of emotion. We could tell from pictures he really wasn't smiling anymore. So I guess the emotion of that numbness was there as far as a warning sign, like being more numb and just not having a lot of emotion, just like not caring as much. When we talk to kids at school, like relatively close to when he ended his life, there was like this joy of happiness, which people tend to say when they're like they people that are depressed, like sometimes don't have the emotion to go do anything to themselves, and they want to end that pain. And it's almost like when he was put on the medication, it was to a point where he could relieve, like be at a point, like he was very euphoric, very happy, like the weekend before that happened. Like Friday, a lot of his friends said he was really happy and excited. And I remember one specific comment that one of his friends made is they were talking about music. And Kristopher made the comment in his classroom, which nobody really put a lot of thought into it because nobody knows about these situations. But he said, oh, that's the song I want to have played at my funeral. So it's just like, if we would have just, somebody would just came forward and figure this out. It's just, those are some of the signs I look at, and I hold so much regret in myself that I was not able to save my son, which leads me on this journey to save as many lives as I can and make a difference and just serve them until I fix it. So it's just like
I hate the fact that we know what we're each other feeling, because that just means we've suffered a loss, a significant loss. But that regret, it's a real thing, and it's whether it's realistic or not, what you regret, whether you could have physically seen things or known things or tried to save your son, that's up to experts to figure out. But that regret feeling is real. And what year was it when your son passed?
2010.
2010. How long after did it take you to finally let that guilt, that regret, that remorse go, and that shift happen where you said, I'm going to go utilize his sorrow and his story and the things that he went through to help other people?
So after the incident, we were going to grief counseling, especially with the kids, every single week for 3 years. And there was still the regret. And there was actually one big regret that really was weighing on me, is what my 9-year-old daughter went through that night. that bothered me the most. That really affected me. It was after I got back from a Tony Robbins event, and I knew I wanted to model myself after him and figure out how I can make an instant impact. I went and got a certification called Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP. And when I went to that programming course, one of the guys there that was running the course talked about letting go of like regret and doing this process on me. And when I had that process done to me, like going into your subconscious and just extracting that, it was all let go. It was just amazing. That was like last year when I did it, about a year ago, where finally all of that regret, all of that just was let go because I had somebody that was trained enough to go down to my subconscious and just extract and let it all out. It was like instant gratification, and it was gone.
Well, let's talk about that, the NLP a little bit, because I don't think many people know much about that, and I think giving a little more of a detail as to what the NLP does, as far as is it a hypnosis? Is it what it does there?
Sorry about the dogs barking in the background.
Can't change the dogs, unfortunately.
Yeah. So neuro-linguistic programming is more of like how our mind communicates with the rest of our body. Right. So if you were to go to France and you thought you ordered a hamburger, but they brought out liver stew, like something is getting lost in translation when, especially we go through a tragedy, like all this emotion, all this baggage is weighed down on you. And so what NLP does is figures out there's several different techniques based on what's going on in your life. They're able to go down and build like tremendous power within you, but it's also able to go in and release all that negative emotion, negative trauma. What's that root cause? They go down there and they rip it out. And so
is it a back and forth conversation, or is it how does that happen?
So you start off with a back and forth conversation to find out what the root cause of the problem is. Once you discover the root cause, then you can assess what type of system you're going to apply, what type of release work are you going to apply to let that go. It's no hypnosis. You're always awake. You're always in control. And the best thing about it is I'm just a guide, or the people that do it is just a guide. It's you focusing on what is the issue and like letting it go. For example, one of them is called timeline therapy. So what it is you close your eyes and let's say you pinpoint like one moment in your life or multiple moments in your life, but one specific moment that you find like, you get to the root cause. I never felt enough. Like my mom never made me feel like I was enough. So what you do is I have you close your eyes, I have you float up above your timeline, go back to that very first instance where you never felt like enough. And then I'll ask you some questions there in regards to what can you learn positive from that event and store it away into your subconscious. I ask you to float over and look down so you're disassociated from the event. And then I ask you to look at that event and say, what emotions are you having from that? And so then typically I have you go into the event where you see it through your own eyes. A lot of the emotions just from that transfer is gone. But then most of all, when you float back up from that event, I ask you to release all the negative emotions from that event. And every time I've done that and I brought you back to yourself and you open your eyes again, the first thing anyone says is, I feel lighter. They feel lighter, their mind starts wandering to positive thoughts. And then part of it as a coach is you start instilling skills and techniques and like direction for where they want their life to go. None of it's me. All of it is completely them. And so then they start having like, I want to do this in the next year. I want to do this for myself. So we start giving goals and start moving them forward. And figure out how I get rid of bad behaviors or bad habits. How do I leverage that out of my life?
It's and the reason why I asked, I did a little research on what it was, but I wanted to hear it so that people listening could also understand it. And it's kind of like when I don't know if you heard the story before. I know everyone else is probably going to here comes the story again. But for me, when I went through my depression after my brother died, it was a 13-year period, and it was a long time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was given a trigger, I call it. It was a gift, but it was the trigger that created the forgiveness within myself. But it was a quilt made out of my brother's clothes that my grandmother had kept the week that he died. And it was the first tangible thing I had of my brother in 13 years. And that gift and being able to have my brother in my hands essentially spurned this emotional overflow inside of me. And I went down to my basement office and I wrote 26,000 words of very vivid, very clear memories of my brother. And it was this timeline release where I was going through the course of my life in my mind and in my soul, and I was letting that all go onto paper. That allowed me to finally begin the healing process. I wasn't healed, but it opened the door for me to allow forgiveness and love and all the other things that I'd been shutting out for so long to sort of come back into my life on a, not necessarily all at once, but I was able to start to allow that process to happen. So I understand the theory behind NLP, which is essentially what I had happen to me. Right.
You did yourself. Yeah.
Right. So I'm always intrigued. So my background's in human behavior and body language. So that's my expertise. So I love how the mind works, and I love how personalities play a role in decision making and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff I get geeked out on. So let's get back to your son. And what kind of kid was he? If you had to sit down and just describe Kristopher in the 12 years of his life, what would that description be?
Yeah. So I've been a coach now for over 25 years working with youth sports. So I recognize kids. I know that certain kids learn at different levels, and I can spot kids that have a lot of talent. And Kristopher, I started off in football. He was our center. I coached him for 3 years. He moved into a different program. I coached at a different grade level, but just like the level that he was playing at was just tremendous. He was really good at what he did. In fact, when he passed away, he was 6'1", 220 pounds in 8th grade. Really, he had a size, I think, 13 or 14 foot.
Wow.
So part of the thing is like, how far could he have gone? You always have those regrets, like what would have happened? Like you're never going to have those answers, but the thing is that he was incredible at building things. He could take a 500 piece Lego set, go down in the basement, and my mom used to buy them for Christmas for him, and he'd have it done in 2 hours. She goes, I spent $500 on that. Couldn't you take a little longer? So it's just like he was really smart, really intelligent. The classes that he wanted to excel at, just unbelievable. Unbelievable. He tested very high too. Like he could go take just a standardized testing. I know his entrance exam into his high school, he scored a 98% on it. So he is very intelligent. I remember speaking to one of his teachers, and he said, Kristopher was the only student I've ever had that challenged me to, he'd always ask why. Why is that? So he challenged me to go find answers that I didn't know that I had to provide to the class. So it's just that type of intelligence that you have in a kid, and to see it move down very quickly, because he's still a kid, even though that he's that size. He doesn't understand how to immediately change his emotion and change his impact and get out of those states. And that's one of the things that I did regret. I don't regret anymore, because I know that this is part of a process. This is part of a plan. I look at life now that Kristopher was put in my life for 14 years. My goal is to make a global impact in this world. And that's what he did for me, to spark and unite this huge fire and drive and passion inside myself to speak all over the place and make as many impacts as I can.
What was he like as a sibling? What was the relationship like with his other siblings?
It's funny that you say he was good with Mickschl, which is his younger sister. Then he had a younger sister. I was like 2 or 3 at the time. And I remember seeing pictures of them just always cuddling on the couch and doing nice things with them. I remember one instance, my mom was telling me about this. Kristopher and Mickschl were out in the swimming pool when they were younger. And so they were playing lifeguard, and they were yelling, help, help, help. And my mom kept running outside because she thought somebody was drowning. So they actually had to come up with a different, instead of saying help, they're like, tweet, tweet, tweet. Because my mom kept running out of the house. She thought somebody was drowning. But he had a lot of fun. He was he was always building forts, just had a creative imagination. He would draw in Michaela and Gigi and they'd all play, and he'd always be loving and caring to entertain other people. He was always there to help their needs as well and make them feel good. And that was the type of friend he was too.
That's a great transition because, you were talking about how the friends were giving you some insight as to what was happening prior to when he took his life. What was his relationship like with his friends, and where did the bullying start? And have you spoken to his friends to find out whether or not A, they knew about it, and B, why didn't they say something to somebody?
I did not speak to their friends in regards to like who was doing it or what was doing it and what would they like, did they stop it? Like I didn't really speak to anybody about that. What I did is just kind of look at, like, ask questions to get at like what was his mood or behavior. I think we were in such a grief state, and he was in 8th grade, so all the friends were going off to different high schools, so it was hard to like keep track of them then. But like we were just looking for warning signs and like what was changing, what was different about him. I didn't find out till several years later, where I just kind of started piecing together and then asking certain questions about what the situation was. I heard specifically, and I remember specifically seeing things on Facebook too that led me, oh, this was going on. So I remember like he would wash the table for this girl that he liked because they all had lunch duty and they had different times they had to wash the table. Well, he would do that for her. And then I found out that the girls would laugh at him and kind of make fun of him. I remember one time he was coming back from his 8th grade trip, from the graduation trip from DC. And I remember seeing a picture on Facebook, and he was sleeping, and one of the girls are like pointing at him, and they wrote "ew" like down below. So it's just like all these signs started matching up and started figuring out like something was going on.
First of all, middle school is by far the worst years for any boy or girl.
Yeah.
I pride myself on being a very aware father, only because of my understanding of human behavior and body language. And my kids just can't. My wife, nobody can hide anything from me, which is a curse and a blessing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just like to be dumb and not know anything.
Yeah.
Fortunately, that's not my world. But my son, 7th grade, 6th and 7th grade especially, were brutal. And if it wasn't for a phone call from a parent, and this was literally, I think it was such a break for us, because I don't think we would have known the severity of it had we not gotten this phone call. And apparently there was a group text with a bunch of kids, boys and girls, and it was pretty much a gang up on my son text, and it was vile. It was just kill yourself. We hate you. You're like all that kind of. It was brutal. And and my son, he wrote, "Maybe I will," and and the mom. Luckily, we did the same thing. Normally, not every day, but after this we did. But there was, the mom looked at her daughter's texts and saw it and called and reached out, and it was an important conversation that we ended up having with my son, whether or not it was meant as shock to try to shock them, or if it was he was thinking about it. It was one of those moments where I'm so thankful that we got that phone call, because I needed to have that access into my son's emotional life and to really get access into what was going on, and why, and to talk it through and to have the conversation about bullying and being a leader and understanding other people's, why they do those things. And it was such an important conversation we had. And if it wasn't for a phone call, it would have never happened.
Sure. Yeah. It's that you say that, like, one of the things I always tell like parents, like, well, how do you know if your son's being bullied? Either somebody at school is seeing it, it's going to be seen. But the one thing is I tell other parents, if you have a group of parents or friends that are like all friends with the kids, a lot of the times those kids will either confine in the parent, or talk to. Like they'll build a rapport. Like I remember in high school, I built a rapport with one of my friends' dads, and like so if there was something bothering you, you could extract it out of another kid, and that was such an important thing that you said that happened, where she reached out and called you. I know that your son didn't go to anybody specifically, but I remember looking into one of the books by Chloe Mattis, who's like one of the leading psychologists out there dealing with family therapy. And she mentioned in her book that kids are a lot smarter than you think they are. They will protect their family, they'll protect their friends, and you won't know like how much stress they're under. Like they'll come up and want to stay home sick from school because the mom's being abused by the dad, and they want to protect the dad. May not do anything to them while he's there. So there's all these things going on in these kids' head, and we can never figure out how each kid is so different and how they work. But the one thing to have is that good network of parents that can maybe say, hey, you know what, Betsy, can you reach out to my son and talk to him and see if you can extract anything? I think something's off, but I don't know. Would you be willing to talk to him? I think he's talked to you before. You built a rapport with him. So parents helping each other out is so crucial in middle school and high school, by far.
I think, and on that same line, I do mentorship. And one of the things that I found as a mentor to middle and high school kids is I have that rapport with the parents.
Yeah.
The parents will say, listen, something's not right. You know, he won't talk to us, but I know he trusts you or she trusts you. Can you have that conversation? So I think you're absolutely right where whether it's a parent of a friend or a mentor, a teacher, or somebody that is in that trust circle with the kids that can have maybe a different vantage point as to what's going on than you know, sometimes you become blind to things in your house because it's every day you see your son or daughter and you don't always pick up on the subtle changes because life just is so busy, and your mind might be at work still, and you're not, you know, your son, you can obviously tell if you were in a bubble in a vacuum, you could see that problem, but in the grand scheme of life, sometimes you miss stuff.
Yeah.
I just think it's important. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. I know, like, one of the things that you can do specifically as a parent, like a lot of the times we'll come home and it's like, how's school? And it's such a basic question to think about. But really, if you ask better questions, you're probably going to get better answers. And like I said, each kid is so different that you're going to know that how your kid operates, whether he's more visual, whether he's kinesthetic, like different learning styles. And once you're able to like read your child and understand him better, you're better able to communicate with them because you're going to speak their language that they're most prevalent learning in. Like, oh, my one son's a visual learner, so I'll draw a picture for him. He's 7 years old. I know he was having issues in school. So I'd sit down and said, you know what, Grayson, I know that you're upset, but why don't you draw me a picture of what school was like today? And then I go through there and talk about the different points so then I can reach out to the principals and the teachers, and it's like a round circle. So once I learned my son's communication style, I was able to instantly build that rapport and find out how he wants to relay information to me. So once you figure out your son or daughter, how they can relay information to you, then you've got a big battle that you're taken away of because you're able to communicate with them in their language, and they're more willing to communicate with you.
It's funny you say that. So that is literally my background and figuring out communication styles and understanding. And somebody today on Facebook posted a video stating, you know, parents, you know, don't be so hard on yourselves. You're not responsible for how your kids end up. All you can do is give them your best and provide for them and give an opportunity. And ultimately it's their decision. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, on what planet does that make any sense whatsoever? If it was simply just that, if parenting was just, hey, I'm going to give you a house, a good school, food, an opportunity to these are the rules. If you don't follow them, well, you made choices, you know, like, where does that make sense? And I started to think, so I wrote a post on his page and I'm like, listen, to be honest with you, parenting is all about communication style. If you don't, if my daughter is a completely different personality than my son. Mm-hmm. And if I treated my son, who's 5 years younger, the same way that I treated my daughter and communicated with my daughter, he'd be on Pluto and I'd be on Earth. Like there'd be no communication whatsoever. And figuring out my son's personality type and understanding how he needs to be spoken to and how he prefers to communicate with others and all those things. That's what parenting is. Yeah. That's literally all it is. It's not it's not a task. It's not a checklist that you go down. It's literally learning who the person you made is.
Yeah.
And how they evolve from the time they take their first breath when they're born until they leave your house and become an adult themselves. Like that's the process of being a parent.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as providing services.
It's funny that you say that, because God, we just keep rolling off of these ideas back and forth. It's so similar with you being a communications expert. So with you being a communications expert, you're able to achieve the knowledge you want from your kids. You're able to read it. You're able to understand it. And you know what? You're probably dumping a lot less emotional baggage on them because of what you do, versus maybe those 10 years where you were pushing people away. Maybe that created a different baggage for your kids and your wife, because you were in that place where I couldn't help anybody. But once you get into that place where you're willing to serve and understand, then you're able to go in and find out what's going on with this kid, what's going on with this parent. And a lot of the times why I say that us as parents dump this emotional baggage onto our kids, because we don't understand with our kids what may bother them from what we're doing in our lives. And especially with, 50% of marriages end in divorce?
Yeah.
I mean, we always say, oh, it's not your fault. Well, you know what? I understand it's not your fault, but what is that kid feeling? Does that kid feel unloved? Does he feel like he's not enough? And does he hold that on to him for years and years and years? And it develops problems in the future because my parents got divorced and we never addressed like how to serve that child best. And like you said, it's about serving our kids. Once we have kids, it's serving them so they grow up in a mental environment where they're strong and a leader like you do with the mentoring, but also to make sure that if there's issues in their lives, they can choose to learn how to solve them.
It's huge. It is, and you're absolutely right. During the 13 years where I was incapable of receiving or giving love, incapable. Mm-hmm. I didn't have it. I was so calloused and closed off. And I mean, I was still doing my job. I was still a loyal and faithful husband. I was a protective and providing father. I just wasn't giving to anybody, friends, family, nobody. So my attention to details was limited to those that weren't emotionally connected to me. If I wasn't an emotional connection, I was lights out, amazing. But if there was any emotional connection to me, I was blinders. I couldn't figure anything out. Mm-hmm. And once I let that go, then all of a sudden everything became clear. And I tell the story that when I came up the next morning after writing those 26,000 words, I saw color in the light coming through my kitchen window, like a ray of light. And I could see every band of color. And I remember thinking to myself, why have I never noticed that? And it was just so brilliantly beautiful. It was like a rainbow, but like 1,000 rainbows in one band of light. And it was just so mesmerizing that I remember noticing how mesmerizing it was. And those are things I would have never seen prior to those 13 years. So that the emotional baggage part is gigantic. And I'm a firm believer in investing in the next generation. Mm-hmm. And it's important.
What you just said there, kind of, we just keep rolling off each other. It's so amazing, this conversation. Yeah. Like you talked about like the emotional baggage, and like you used your own form of NLP to release it. But you know what? It only took an instant. It only took one moment for your life to completely change. I know it took 13 years. It didn't take 13 years to change your life. It took an instant. And it was that one instant that changed your life. But the other thing is, you were talking about, I only saw color, or for the first time in a long time, and I saw that detail. That's perception. We literally, if we look out at the world right now, and we physically see 2 million bits per second, but we only take into our mind 124 bits per second. So when you said, I didn't see color, I didn't see these things, one of the things that distorts those millions of bits is called deletions. So if you looked out at everything right now and looked for green, and then closed your eyes, and then tell me everything that's red, I only saw what I want to see. And another part, so that loses millions of bits per second by deletions. But the distortions was another one because of your mood. So your mood, if you're in a bad mood, you're going to only find everything that's negative and bad in this world. But if you're in a good mood, you'll find the good in this world. So your emotional state by your focus strictly deletes or distorts what you actually see. So for 13 years, you only saw negativity because you were distorting it and deleting it. And then the last one is generalizations. We build up all these generalizations about anything in life based on our knowledge. And the one thing that it goes to kids, especially dealing with bullying, if we allow that kid to affect our life off of his 124 out of billions of bits per second, there's no reason to. Like, you don't have to weigh in on what that kid says to me based on his 124. Like, I'm not going to have his 124, his minor perspective, calling me fat, ugly, stupid, whatever it is, go die. I'm like, dude, that's your perspective. Move on. I'm done. I'm not going to even put any time into that. I'm living my perspective in my life. And if you look at my logo, it says words don't have power. Somebody like you and I, our words can tremendously affect and have power. But it's also, if you look at it from the perspective of another kid putting you down, their words do not have power unless you allow it to.
I did take notice of your logo. It's a great logo. And it's, a logo can say a lot. A logo can say a lot about a person. And, I see some people with logos that are glitz and glam, and I'm like, I don't even know what any of that is about.
Yeah.
I don't even know I don't know. Are you trying to tell me your lights and shining, or are you trying to give me this moment of like clarity? And I'm not getting any of it. But yours, very simple, very concise, very precise to what you do. Which is really cool. So I do appreciate your logo. So let's talk a little bit about the work you're doing today and the things that you're doing in honor of your son, and how you're going out and impacting the masses, and trying to change a course of his life so that they don't end up in the same place that Kristopher did.
Yeah, so speaking in the schools is kind of my first, speaking in the schools and then speaking to parents are kind of my first two spots that I'm hitting. So there's a different kind of coursework that I bring out. So I try to bring like all the heavy guns to get these kids to understand these concepts within that hour time frame. So I give myself an hour, and like one of the things dealing with perspective, like I'll have two kids come up on stage, and I'll have them close their eyes. And I say, think about all this emotional trauma that you have in your life. And your emotional trauma is defined different than somebody else's. So just think about that and take these sandbags and put it into your backpack. Because kids grade school, high school, college kids understand backpacks. And the weight, the more books, the heavier it gets. So as they put these sandbags in, I have them put it on. And I have them stand there while I talk for a while to understand what emotional baggage feels like. And I talk a little bit about how to release that, how to get those things off. Once they release it, then I have them switch and try on each other's emotional baggage. Because when we understand the perspective of like what somebody else is going through, that hits immediately. To feel somebody else's emotional baggage of what they're going through, I'm like, wow, I had no idea. So I try to get their mind thinking about how can we just basically understand, like, don't let other people's words impact us. How can we understand somebody else and what they may be going through? And I can't give a perspective on them unless I physically am in their shoes. And then I give them basically tools on how to overcome all these things. So then I give them the tools, I give them the speech, the tools, the knowledge, and basically I want to just keep providing. So I will put out an email. I'll just keep giving them more knowledge. They can always reach out to me. Like, my deal is to serve. And if any kid ever feels like ending their life is the way out, talk to me, because we will fix that. Like, immediately I will fix that. I am so like confident in what I can do out there that I truly believe I can make an impact just one time meeting with them. But then, like, we talked a little bit about the parenting. Like, the parents, we have so much trauma. I want to help the parents release their trauma. I want to help them, give them the skills, like you said, to better understand their kids, better communicate them. But then on top of it, I want to give them one more skill, which is if their kid is going through, like your son went through a bullying situation, what can they do to help with bullying? What can they do to help with anger, with sadness, to figure that out? I want to give them all the tools they can to help get through that situation as well.
Now, are you marketing yourself through contacting schools themselves, or schools finding out about you? How are you getting yourself out there to everybody?
I'm contacting schools, but I'm also doing Facebook marketing. So I'm trying to get my name out there through some Facebook marketing, maybe some mastermind groups or some online groups or sessions, some in-person sessions, but it's all done. A lot of it's done through Facebook marketing.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the things I was intrigued about when we were talking offline was your work as a Lyft and Uber driver.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the people that come into your car and needing a ride and the interactions you've had with them.
So like when I knew I wanted to do this, the other career I had was done over. I went all in. I figured out a way to support myself. It's the Uber and Lyft. But every person that comes into that vehicle, I want to make an impact in their life. If they want me to, or if they choose to engage with me, like I will tell them my story about my son. And then, if I can read, like you can read people really well. Well, I can read people really well. Like, well, so, you mentioned this before when we were talking, what's going on with that? So then we'll start digging and figuring it out. And I remember one guy I had, he's like, you know what, Charlie, I just feel like I've never felt like enough for my dad. Like I've never felt like I was enough. We don't communicate well. And I don't remember the advice I gave him, but literally it was a 5 or 6 minute Lyft ride. And I dropped him off, and I remember getting him like 3 months later. And the first thing, he gets in my car and shuts the door. Hey, I remember you. You're that motivational speaker. Oh my gosh. I just have the best relationship with my dad. Like everything you said to do, we go hang out and have drinks together. We go out to movies together. I've never had such an impactful moment with my dad before. And you did that for me. So I'll get stuff like that. I've had people that have been suicidal, and one lady was an actress, and she comes in and she's telling me all about how her parents don't accept her lifestyle and what's bothering her. And that was like a 15-minute ride. And by the time we were done, I had her actually the next week. She came back. She had no signs of being suicidal or anything. She came back next week. She goes, my parents are accepting of like what I'm trying to do now. They're supportive of me. It's just like, you just know, it's like a feeling with all the knowledge that you've built up. It's a feeling on where to take the direction, the same way you're able to take direction in your job and your role, not only as a police officer, but as a mentor and leader. You figure out you have all this knowledge. Now you can serve. And once you build up all this knowledge and you're able to serve others, like it impacts. And I've probably impacted about 3,000 people coming into my Uber Lyft ride over the course of the last 2.5 years. So about 3,000 people, I kind of figured like maybe a third of it. So about 3,000, but everyone, either small or large, and that number is probably lowball too. Small or large, I made an impact.
It's people don't recognize. It's funny, you have hairdressers, police officers, you have people that are in the service industry, bartenders. Mm-hmm. They all have stories. Mm-hmm. of moments where, at a bar, guys, drinking himself to oblivion, and he's spilling his guts, and a conversation with the bartender turns into the thing that sends them on the right direction, or your hairdresser. There's just so many cool stories that you hear in life, similar to that. And I just think being able to use your gift, one of the greatest gifts you can have is to be a good listener. Mm-hmm. And then the second gift you can have is listening and then figuring out ways to help. Mm-hmm. One thing to just sit there listening and just to be an ear, but it's another to have some insight and some expertise to be able to help somebody work through something. So I commend you on not just being the guy that picks people up and drops them off, but actually giving a crap about the person that's sitting in the backseat of your car.
I know that one of the things, like when I went to the Tony Robbins event, he talks about 2 spiritual needs. It's growing your own knowledge, growing yourself, everything about growth for yourself, but also contributing. So once I transform my life into those 2 spiritual needs, where I actually grow my knowledge, myself, to be healthier, be able to help others, I give that knowledge back. I serve in enlightenment. It's I've been in a place in my life where I've never been before. It's just grow and serve and grow and serve. My whole life has changed because I chose to grow my knowledge and how can I serve others. And you get into the state in this place where money really doesn't matter, but that happiness that can impact somebody's life, that is the most tremendous feeling you could ever feel.
I think the power of positive thinking is real.
Yeah.
I was never much into the mumbo jumbo shit like that. It wasn't me. I was pretty much a black and white kind of guy.
And you might have been raised that way. Do your parents possibly?
Now, my mom's was way into the,
Okay.
I mean,
Was she? Okay.
my mom was a moccasin wearing 60s hippie. And so, I mean, my mom is the most amazing human being on the planet. I love my mom more than life itself. And we're going off on a tangent here, but it's a funny story. My mom, my dad left when I was 9 months old. And so it was me and my older brother, Andy, and, he was special needs. He was autistic and stuttered. And my mom worked 3 jobs, and we lived in public housing, but we had neighbors that would take care of us. And we lived with another family for years and years and years. And, but my mom was we always had like an open policy where you could say whatever on your mind, however you needed to say it. You couldn't cuss at the other person, but you could cuss. So I could drop F-bombs when I was 10. And as long as I wasn't saying F you to my mom, I could say, I'm so effing pissed off. And it was cool. It's just the way it's always been in my life. So communication was always huge in our family. And there was never a rule where you couldn't say what was on your mind. You just had to do it in a respectful way. Even if you were angry and you were cussing, as long as you weren't directing it at the person you're talking to, it was cool. So it's kind of what I've transitioned in my life is with my family is now, granted, I don't let my kids drop F-bombs, but I do want my kids to be able to speak openly about what's going on in their life so that they understand that no matter what, even if it's wrong what they're doing, or I want to know what's going on, because it's the only way that we can survive as a family is if we're all communicating and on the same page. So I think at the end of the day, if you live your life in a way to where you are representing who you are all the time when the door's closed or when you're out in public, I think that's number one. There's too many people in this industry, in any industry for that matter, that are one way at home and another way out in public. And I think the people that are authentically pure and good people are the ones that are the same way when the doors are closed as what they appear to be on Facebook. So I do appreciate that about you. Number two, I think that the desire to serve is the single greatest gift you can give to another person. And that feeling, and we talked a little bit about entrepreneurial stuff and business and turning things into money and that's all great. But at the end of the day, if I can't at least go to bed at night and be proud of myself if I just made money.
Yeah.
It's just, I can't do
nobody will ever feel happiness just with money. It doesn't happen.
I don't think your legacy can, I know a lot of rich people that die lonely. And no matter how many friends they have while they're alive, ultimately, if they didn't give something of themselves to someone else, then the life they lived was not as meaningful as it probably could have been. So I think the service component, the ability to want others to have success and to help people navigate life is a great gift to have. And I thank you for having that gift and sharing it. Third, I think anybody that can take tragedy and turn it into triumph, no matter if it takes 13 years or not, I think it's a great thing, because it means that you have you fought, because I wrote today on a post for my wife for her sister passing. I said the cost of love is you're willing to go through the pain of losing them. That's what love is. You're willing to go through the pain of losing them. And that's, to me, the most profound thing I've written in a long time, because it's true. Like, if you're not going to invest your heart into somebody because you're afraid you're going to lose them, then you're not truly able to love. And it's that, it's that knowledge that at some point in time that could happen, but I'm willing to go through that to love you today. And I think that's important.
It's funny that you talk about that last piece, because specifically, like, all these moments, and if my parents were not the way they were, if Kristopher didn't pass away, if Andy didn't pass away, if your dad left when you were younger, like, all these things formulate who we are today. So let your wife know that her journey with her sister passing away is not ending, but there's the legacy that she can build, that fire, once that grief is gone, that fire will be able to ignite her to say, hey, I'm going to do this to honor my sister, my mom, or my dad, or whatever. We all have that capability. We just got to flip that decision switch on and say, hey, it's time to do it. How can I honor her legacy, rather than saying, hey, I could feel sorry for Kristopher the rest of my life, but I know he gave me a gift, and that's to help as many people as I can. And that's how I look at life now. Like, what can I do to change this around to either help somebody else or grow myself?
Perfect. Perfect way to end the show.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Don't go anywhere. We're going to talk offline. I'm going to close out the show. Everybody, thank you for watching this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Thank you again to Charlie Mickschl for being on the show and for sharing his story and sharing his son with us, and his passion for helping people. The world, I don't think we'll ever get rid of bullying, but if we take a more proactive approach, if we as parents insist to our schools that they need to do more, and that a couple assemblies a year is not a solution. It's a Band-Aid on a sucking chest wound, and there are proven ways to changing behaviors. There's proven ways to empowering kids. There's proven ways to create leadership qualities within kids so that they don't feel like victims. And I think that if we're not doing that as parents, we're failing our kids. Even if our kids are not being victims of bullying, or our kids might be bullies, I think we're doing our kids a disservice. So if you have a voice, you have the ability to enact change. That if every parent went to their school district and said, I want change, and they demanded it, I think we would have a whole lot more success than we're currently having with the bullying epidemic. So on that note, thank you very much, everybody. God bless, and go out and be kind to one another.